I'm 20 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been living on my own. It all started after my mom, my sister, and I moved to a small city in Northern America and bought an apartment together. For a while, everything was fine, quiet, peaceful, a new start. But then my mom met a man, and before long, they got married. Naturally, we moved into his place. Our apartment, with its 2 bedrooms and creaky floorboards, sat empty for 6 long years, gathering dust. I think we all assumed we'd sell it one day, but that day never came. When I finished high school and started college, I moved back into the apartment. It was closer to campus, and it seemed practical. At first, I barely spent time there. I only slept there during the week and spent my weekends with my parents. The apartment was quiet, lifeless even, but I figured that was just because it had been empty for so long. When I turned 17, my boyfriend and I decided to live together. He moved in, and for the first few months, everything was fine, or at least, I think it was. It's hard to remember now. I was busy with classes, and he worked as a security guard, pulling overnight shifts that left me alone for days at a time. It's strange looking back because those months are nothing but a blur in my memory. That's when the first signs started to appear, though I didn't realize it at the time. The nights when my boyfriend wasn't home were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, unable to sleep, with a creeping sense of dread pressing down on me like a weight. It wasn't one of those irrational fears where you jump at every noise, it was worse. It was like something knew I was there, watching and waiting in the dark corners of the room. Sometimes I wouldn't sleep for 3 days straight. I'd just sit there, wide-eyed and shaking, listening to the silence. When my boyfriend came home, I'd break down. I'd cry uncontrollably, curled up on the floor, unable to explain what was wrong. At some point, I started drawing faces on the walls, hundreds of them, just to feel like I wasn't alone. I didn't even realize what I was doing until my boyfriend walked in one morning after a shift. He found me sitting in the far corner of the living room, surrounded by those strange faces, crying into my knees. He didn't say anything at first, he just stared at the walls, his face pale. After that, he quit his job, found work during the day, and bought me a dog. Things seemed to get better. The apartment felt normal again. We renovated the place, painted over the drawings, and I eventually graduated and got a job. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, but we only used one. The second room turned into a dumping ground for all our junk, old furniture, broken electronics, stacks of rugs we didn't need, and even my boyfriend's motorcycle, which sat there gathering dust. It wasn't a big deal. We rarely even thought about that room. But last week, everything changed. I work night shifts now, so I'm awake at odd hours, often with just my laptop and my dog for company. One night, I was sitting at my desk, watching a movie with my headphones on, when a sound exploded from the kitchen. It was a loud, metallic crash, like a pan being dropped onto the floor. I jumped so hard I nearly fell off my chair. My dog, who had been lying beside me, bolted to the door and started barking frantically. The strange thing was that she didn't leave the room. Normally, she'd be the first to run to the source of a noise, but this time she just stood at the door, growling softly with her ears flattened against her head. I got up, heart pounding, and walked over. When I unlocked the latch and stepped into the hallway, my dog refused to follow. I looked back at her, confused. She was staring at me with wide, nervous eyes, her tail tucked between her legs. The hallway felt colder than usual. I walked toward the kitchen, the floor creaking under my feet, and turned on the light. Everything looked normal, nothing had fallen or moved. The pots and pans were still neatly stacked on the shelves. That's when I noticed the window. It was open. That might not sound strange, but it's the middle of summer here in the north, and we never open the windows. It's too cold, even during the day. Besides, every window has bars on the outside. I shut it quickly, trying to shake the unease that was building in my chest. About half an hour later, I heard another noise, a faint, rhythmic sound, like someone murmuring in the distance. At first, I thought it was coming from my movie, but then I paused it, and the noise didn't stop. It was soft, almost melodic, like the babbling of a child who hadn't learned to speak. My blood ran cold. I looked at my dog, who was sitting upright, staring at the doorway. I stood frozen for a moment before stepping closer to the hallway. The sound was coming from the second room, the one we never used. The door was closed, just as we'd left it, but the sound was unmistakable. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the apartment. Fear washed over me in waves, my nails digging into my palms as I tried to think. Could it be the wind? A neighbor? But the voices were too clear, too close. I backed up slowly, went into the living room, and shut the door to the hall. I sat there for the rest of the night, clinging to my dog, waiting for the first rays of sunlight to spill through the windows. The next night, things got worse. I started seeing shadows in my peripheral vision, small, darting shapes that disappeared the moment I turned to look at them. They were everywhere, slipping behind chairs, skimming along the edges of the walls. My dog saw them too. She followed something with her eyes, growling under her breath as her head jerked back and forth. Then came the sound, metallic scraping, like scissors snapping open and shut. I jumped up, my heart hammering. My dog whined and pressed herself against me. I ran to wake my boyfriend, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, frantic. He looked at me, confused and half asleep. "Hear what?" he asked. I didn't know how to explain it. I sat at my desk, clutching my dog, trying to calm down. That's when it hit me, the motorcycle. It was in the second room. Could something be making that noise in there? My mind raced, and suddenly I remembered the baby crib. It had been left behind by the previous owners, shoved into the corner and forgotten. The next morning, my boyfriend took the motorcycle out to storage, and we checked it carefully for scratches or marks. There were none. I thought maybe that would end it, but it didn't. Last night, the noise came back, louder, sharper, and closer. The door to the hall creaked open on its own, and I slammed it shut. Now every night, I sleep with a knife on the nightstand. I feel like something is getting closer, moving through the apartment. It starts in the second room, but every night it comes nearer, and I don't know what's going to happen when it finally steps into the light. I'm terrified to tell my boyfriend. I know he'll think I've lost my mind. But this thing, whatever it is, isn't going to stop. And one day soon, it's going to come for me.